And greetings there, academic proletariat, and welcome to this episode of the Fireside Chats with Mr. Olson, where we will be discussing the rise and fall of the Populist, or the People's Party, throughout the years 1892 to 1896. Okay, this topic can be found in period 6 of the new AP US History concept outline, and is quite an important one because they like to ask about it a lot, shockingly enough. Okay, so to begin, I just want to remind you that there's a guided notes that goes along with this video, and it has this graphic on it. So if you don't have a hold of that, go ahead and send me an email and I'll get you it. I'm going to start you off with a story, okay? And here's how the story is going to work. Every time I say the word listed at the top of one of these columns, you need to draw in something to represent that word. So if I say people 100 times, you need to draw in 100 people. I would suggest stick figures, not like caricatures of me, as in they take kind of a long time. So let's practice. Okay, we're going to practice really quick. I'll show you what it should look like, and then we'll go from there, all right? So we're going to start our story in the market revolution. And if you recall, the market revolution was a time period in which America underwent a major change in the way things were bought and sold. So during the market revolution, there were people from America, and there were people from England, and there were people from Ireland, and there were people from Germany. Okay, and there were people in the United States. There was a lot of immigration, and so the number of persons in the United States increased dramatically. Now, in order to facilitate a large population, you need crops. And then in order to keep the population happy and healthy, you need factories to make goods. Now, in order to buy these things, you need to make sure that you have enough gold, which was found in the gold rush, and it was found in Alaska. And then you take that material, and it was found in conjunction with some silver. You then take the gold, because we are on what is called a gold standard at this time period, and you back money with the gold. So for every piece of gold, you have some money. So there are 3 pieces of gold on the screen, so there are going to be 3 monies. Okay? That's how it should start out. Hopefully you get the gist. Kind of follow along with me as I tell you this story. So we're going to jump ship from the market revolution. We're going to go ahead to the Gilded Age. And in the Gilded Age, there were a lot of people. There were people from Russia. There were people from Italy. There were people from Greece. There were people from Poland. There were people from Slovakia. People from the Czech Republic, which wasn't a country yet, but people from Czechoslovakia. There were people from China. There were people from Japan. There were people from the middle of the ocean. There were people from Iceland. There were people. There were lots of people coming to America because America had what was going on. What did it have, do you ask? It had factories. It had factories that made meat. It had factories that made oil. It had factories that made shirts. It had factories that made cars. It had factories that made buggies. It had factories that make new factories. Factories. Tons of factories making all sorts of goods. Goods like shirts, and goods like meat, and goods like nails, and goods like planes. Well, not necessarily planes yet in large scale, but eventually in the Gilded Age you're going to have planes. It was making goods like steel, and goods like railroads, and goods like rail cars, and goods like Pullman's rail cars, and goods like Andrew Carnegie's steel, and goods like John Rockefeller's oil. Goods and goods and goods and goods and goods. Now, at the same time, one good that was being produced was the tractor, and the tractor was used to make crops. And the tractor more efficiently made crops. So you see farmers start to grow a lot more crops. Crops like squash, and crops like pumpkin, and crops like corn, and crops like corn, and crops like corn, and crops like cotton, and crops like corn, and crops like potatoes, and crops like cucumbers, and crops like eggplant. Love eggplant. Well, anyways, that's the deal. Now, because of mining excursions and things like that had been going on in the West, you see America find a lot of gold. They find gold in the Black Hills. They find gold in the White Hills. They find gold in the Yellow Hills. And they have a lot of gold left over from the gold rush that had initially occurred in 1848, 1849. And they even have some gold left over from the Klondike gold rush that happened in the late 1800s. At the same time they're finding all this gold, they just happen to come upon some silver. They find silver in the Comstock Lode. They find silver in Nevada. They find silver in Utah. They find silver in Idaho. They find silver in California. They find silver. They have so much silver, they don't even know what to do with it. Do we make rings with the silver? Do we make necklaces with the silver? We have a lot of silver. Lots and lots of silver. Now, what the problem is, gold is what people want to tie money to. Okay, so every time we find gold, we make some money. And if you have 5 gold bars, you have 5 monies. Okay, that's what was going on during the Gilded Age. So hopefully your chart looks something like that. And what I want to point out to you is there's all these goods and all these crops and all these factories and all these people, but not a lot of money to go around. Okay, so let me take a step back. If I go back here during the market revolution, there were 3 monies to 3 people. That means that each person is allotted 1 money, and there was 1 money to pay for each good, crop, and factory respectable. Okay, now, during the Gilded Age, it wasn't the case. You have all of this, all these factories, all these crops, all these goods, all these people, not enough money to go around. When there's not enough money to go around, what has to happen to the price of goods? What has to happen to the price of crops? What has to happen to the price of factories? It goes down. This is called deflation. When there is not enough money in circulation to pay for things, prices go down. Now you might say to yourself, well, low prices are good. Yeah, but if you're the one who's selling the stuff like farmers, you don't want low crop prices because then you don't make a lot of money. Now, farmers come along and they have a solution. If we can just maybe, instead of tying gold to money, what if we tied silver to money? Then we would have a lot more monies. That's going to be the major issue driving today's fireside chat. So hopefully that gives you a fun little introduction to it. So let's see if we can figure this all out. Okay, so the populists start out as a group of disgruntled farmers, which happens so many times in American history. Anyways, after the Civil War, a group called the Grange pops up in the Midwest. And is a group of farmers that is disgruntled with how things are going for them. They feel like they're getting screwed by the railroads. They feel like they're getting screwed by banks. And so they sort of band together in what you might call a union. Now, you tell a farmer that they're in a union today and you're going to get, pitchforked. But back then, that's kind of what they were doing. They liked it so much, in fact, in the 1880s, they started the Farmers Alliance, which is basically just a big brother of the Grange, and even a Colored Farmers Alliance, to account for all those sharecroppers and black homesteaders that rose up in the years of Reconstruction and after. And then finally, they band together, and instead of having these sort of fringe groups, you see the birth of the Populists, or the People's Party, which is a political party that's going to emerge in 1892. Anyways, we'll get to that in a second. Now, let's backtrack a little bit. Here are the issues the farmers faced. The land that they were growing their crops and their food on was a difficult place to live a lot of the times. We discussed homesteads being places that, were ravaged by tornadoes or ravaged by bugs, or just a hard place to live in general. So there were issues with the land. There wasn't a lot of water all the time. They had to use windmills to sort of resurrect the water from aquifers that were underneath the ground. Anyways, those were hard to build and expensive. Now, that coupled with deflation, which we saw was the result of overproduction and dropping the price, made life hard on farmers, because if their crops aren't worth a lot of money, they're going to have trouble paying stuff back. Now, in addition to that, banks charge them high interest rates on their mortgages, and railroad companies charge them high rates to ship and store their grain. So all these things basically made farmers' lives miserable. So what do you do when you're mad if you're the farmers? You form a political party, a third one. This doesn't happen a lot in America. It's going to happen twice during the late 18 and early 1900s, but today it's almost unheard of. We sort of are stuck in this Democrat-Republican thing. It almost begs the question, why do we not have a third political party? Well, capitalism. Okay, anyways, now here are the farmers' demands. They want to regulate the railroad companies. So they want to evoke, an ever so terrifying word in America, nationalization. They want to nationalize the railroad companies. The government. And just to backtrack for a second, nationalization means that the government takes over the railroad companies. So the farmers think that if the government regulates the railroad companies, it's going to stop the railroad companies from charging them such high rates. The government responds, and in 1887 they pass an Interstate Commerce Commission Act, which sets up this commission to sort of oversee the railroad companies, check their books, and make sure that they're not overcharging. But as you can imagine, a little money goes a long way in government, and the railroad companies just buy the feds off. In addition to that, the farmers want to back the dollar with silver, because that will put more money into circulation, and since it will cause inflation. So the dollar will be worth less, but there will be more of it. So if there's more dollars out there, they'll be able to get a hold of cash more easily, and they'll be able to pay back their debts. And finally, they want constitutional demands. They want a single term for the president and vice president. They want to vote on a secret ballot, and they want popular elections of senators, which at the time had been elected by sort of interest groups, if you will. And so these are ways to limit political corruption, which farmers saw as being a bad thing. Now, kind of a side note, they wanted to restrict immigration because they felt like there were enough workers in America already, and the more workers you add, the more production you need, which is going to make prices go down even more. So they wanted to do that. And then also they wanted to institute an 8-hour workday, which does nothing for a farmer, but it courts Eastern industrial workers, which the populists thought that if they got them into the party, they would be able to swing a lot more votes. So in 1892, they run a candidate in the election, James Weaver. And as you can see by this, he doesn't really do that well comparatively. But if you think about it, he gets over 1 million votes. Okay, so 1/12 of the population is disgruntled enough with this two-party system that it votes for the third party. Now, obviously, you can see that the Democrat Grover Cleveland wins this election, but had those populist votes gone for the Republican Benjamin Harrison, it might have swung the election. I'm not going to say for sure, but they do make an influence and they do have their voice heard. Okay, so in 1892, the populists sort of bust onto the scene, and a lot of people don't take them seriously. So take a minute, pause me, look at this political cartoon as you might see it later down the road, and kind of identify the perspective of this cartoon. Go ahead and give me a pause. Come back in a second once you've done that. Okay, hopefully you notice that down here it says platform of lunacy, meaning that the people who are sort of riding this populist or the People's Party hot air balloon or whatever are lunatics, meaning they're crazies. Okay, this just happens to be James Weaver here with the long beard. Okay, so not only that, but you see that the People's Party are a group of these other crazy nitwits that are trying to mess with the American system. The socialists, the old Grangers, the Knights of Labor, so a union, the Farmers Alliance. And then finally, if you know anything about hot air balloons, what are they filled with? Hot air, which is often a euphemism for somebody, not being completely with it. Okay, so this is occurring at the same time as economic depression in 1893, which causes a lot of people to be out of work. And this is sort of a side note from the populists, but it shows just how disgruntled some people in America are. A group led by a unemployed worker named Coxey march on Washington, D.C. in 1893. This isn't going to be the first time, or I'm sorry, this isn't going to be the last time that disgruntled people march on Washington, D.C., so I want you to keep this in the back of your mind. But it's important to note that during the Gilded Age, workers were unhappy, and they were willing to go to the government to voice their displeasure. Now, 4 years later, and nothing really happens between 1892 and 1896 other than then the Pullman strike. There's another election that's going to pit the Democrats against the Republicans, and the populists make a very, very important decision in American history. If you note, here are the platforms that each party ran on. Now, if you're a populist, who do you think you want to go with? Well, hopefully you say they side with the Democrats, because if you notice here, wealthy businessmen connected to the railroad, which also entails bankers, these are the people that the populists don't like. So they're going to swing for the Democrats in the 1896 election. And the Democratic candidate just happens to be William Jennings Bryan. Here, I'll get a picture of him. There he is. He's right there. Handsome guy. Anyways, he's going to be one of these Henry Clay-ish type figures in American history that's never ever going to go away. So you're going to be hearing about him for a while, just to prep you. Okay, so now in this election, the big issue is the gold standard versus bimetallism. So what the populists want, how they wanted to evoke silver as being connected to the dollar in addition to gold, whereas Eastern industrialists just wanted the gold standard because they controlled all the gold. Makes sense. Anyways, here are the benefits for each side. I'm going to go ahead and let you pause me and write them down. I'm going to give you sort of a quick overview of it. People who want the gold standard want to keep the money supply low, and they want to keep inflation low because it prevents the government from printing money wildly, but mostly it's because the people who are advocating for the gold standard control gold. Okay. Now, there's a side note there that's important to recognize. Those Eastern industrialists, or I'm sorry, those Eastern industrial workers, they want the gold standard too, because if you can keep the money supply low, you also keep prices low. They don't want to see prices go up, which is what happens with inflation, whereas farmers do want to see prices go up, and that's going to be kind of where they break. Okay, bimetallism, so tying both gold and silver to the dollar, will make the money supply go up. It'll cause inflation, but it'll make prices rise, which in sense will help people who are producing goods that are being hurt by low prices, namely the farmers. Eastern industrialists can get away with it. Farmers cannot. Anyways, here are some pictures associated with bimetallism. As you can see, this is a picture of William Jennings Bryan riding a bike, and the wheels are made out of silver and gold, as you can see. Not really working out all that well for him. Okay, so when William Jennings Bryan is running for president in the 1896 election, and I believe this is actually a speech given when he accepts the nomination, he tells America, "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." Sort of elucidating Christ's plight there while also making a reference to the gold standard. He doesn't want America to be stuck on this gold standard, and that's going to be the platform on which he runs. Now, during his campaign, it just seems so happened that he shares the fate as the Populists did in 1892. A lot of people think that he sort of is blowing smoke and giving them a lot of empty promises, as you can see is illustrated by all these things. If you can get nice and close, you can read what they are, but they're basically things that William Jennings Bryan is telling the population, and the farmers, the goofy people, are eating it up. But the journalists and the more cultured type of Americans are able to think more critically and see through Bryan's lies. So they thought. And in the election of 1896, where you see William McKinley go up against William Jennings Bryan, McKinley wins rather easily. Now, one side note here, William Jennings Bryan is supported by the farmers and the former populists, which is indicated by the states that he largely wins. Now, he also carries the South, but that's because the South votes reliably Democratic, of course, until the 1960s. Now, here's the thing. If the populists are going for William Jennings Bryan, who's going for William McKinley? Big money. Big money wins this election. They throw all their dollars at William McKinley, and he gets in office. Anyways, this is sort of a tragedy, and the Populist Party is sort of withers away into nothing. Now, if you think you're going to have trouble remembering this, I have the perfect way to do it. This is one of my favorite things to talk about in American history. I don't know if there's a lot of credibility here, but it works. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a parable between populism and the Wizard of Oz. So if you read the book The Wizard of Oz, I'm going to reference that, but if you've seen the movie, it'll be good enough. Now, here are the things that are going on with the populists, okay? They live on the Great Plains. They have little hope. They tend to be prohibitionists, okay? Kansas is the center of their movement. They don't like banks. They want to try and court industrial workers. They have the support of Western farmers. A lot of them are Western farmers. They support William Jennings Bryan in the 1896 election. They're against the gold standard. They want the silver standard. Some disgruntled people aim their anger at Washington, D.C. They don't like William McKinley because he, of course, beats William Jennings Bryan. They want to see child labor ended. They don't like railroad companies. They don't like Indians. And they don't like Chinese workers. Okay, so you take all those things and you think Wizard of Oz. Okay, so take a minute, pause me if you want to have some fun. If you want me to just give you the answers, just let the video roll. But I'm going to tell you how to relate populism to the Wizard of Oz, okay? If you know the story, this is going to be a lot of fun. Tornadoes on the Great Plains in real life? What was that in the movie? The tornado. Duh, the tornado that takes Dorothy up and flings her off into Never Never Land or whatever it was. Okay, hope of Western farmers is represented by that Dorothy. Dorothy is, the protagonist of the book and the movie, and she sort of represents the hope of the Western farmers. I don't know why Toto is a prohibitionist, not entirely sure, but I guess he doesn't drink in the movie, so we'll go with that. Anyways, Kansas is the center of populism in real life. What state did the Wizard of Oz take place in? Kansas. Oh my gosh. Now, banks are one of Western farmers' enemies. So you think back to yourself, well, who was an enemy of Dorothy in the movie? The Wicked Witch of the East. If you remember, the Wicked Witch of the East is who the house falls down upon. Okay, industrial workers, somebody who, or the people who the populists wanted to court. The Tin Man. The Tin Man, of course, is a manufactured thing, and that he's made out of tin, and he's been doing the same thing for years and years and years, that he can't move anymore, and he no longer has a heart, just like industrial workers. They were mechanized by the Gilded Age. Western farmers are exemplified by the scarecrow in that they don't have a brain. They just keep growing and growing and growing in a place that's not really conducive for it. William Jennings Bryan is the Cowardly Lion. I don't really get this one, but we'll just go with it. Here's where it gets good. The gold standard, Yellow Brick Road. The silver standard, now here's where you need to know the book. In the book, the red slippers were actually silver. So when you take the silver slippers and you add them to the Yellow Brick Road, it eventually is going to lead you home to Kansas, which is how the book goes. Washington, D.C., Emerald City. Oz, how silver is measured. Ounces. Oh my God, I love it. William McKinley is the wizard. The Munchkins are child workers. The Wicked Witch of the West is, of course, the railroad companies who had been operating and screwing the farmers in the West. Indians, who had also been giving farmers a tough time, were the Flying Monkeys. And then finally, Chinese laborers, who also were seen as giving Western farmers a hard time, were the Yellow Winkies, or the people who worked with the the Wicked Witch of the West. That, my friends, is a beautiful thing. So, if you can answer this central historical question, going off of what we just learned, why did the Populist Party attract millions of supporters, how did it end for them, and what does that indicate, you'll be in good shape. Anyways, this is Mr. Olson, signing off. Peace.